One of the best traits of the Sacramento Kings last season was their ability to follow up a tough loss with a big win to get themselves back on track. So far this season, we've seen it already. After the first Warriors loss, the Kings bounced back and beat the Los Angeles Lakers on their home floor. Well, now they have a great opportunity here with back-to-back games against the Rockets in Houston. On today's Locked On Kings podcast, we preview these two matchups with the host of the Locked On Rockets podcast, Jackson Gatlin.
You are Locked On Kings, your daily Sacramento Kings podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And now, ladies and gentlemen, it is that time for another episode of Locked On Kings.
Hello and welcome into Locked On Kings, your podcast hub for Sacramento Kings coverage all season long. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. That's $150 if your team wins. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. My name is Matt George. I have the privilege of being your host here. I'm a Sacramento sports anchor and reporter for ABC 10 News. And last season, I didn't like the doubleheader too much, or at least the two games against the same team. And the Kings actually had two games against the Houston Rockets last year. Those games were in Sacramento. But this year, maybe this early two games against the Rockets comes at a great time, because 3 out of the first 4 games have been against really tough opponents, and that's no disrespect to the Utah Jazz. The Jazz are actually a better team than I think we saw in that opener in Utah, but the Kings handled their business the same way in Utah that I expect them to handle their business over the course of this weekend in Houston. Game 1 is tomorrow. Game 2 is Monday. The expectation should absolutely be, with or without DeAaron Fox, that the Kings get both of those games and come back to Sacramento for Wednesday's game next week against the Portland Trailblazers. Like, that should be the expectation for this Kings team if they are as good as they believe they are, if they say they are the championship contenders that they want to be, and if last season's Kings third seed versus Houston Rockets in the cellar stands true. Now, I do believe, and as you're going to hear from Jackson Gatlin here over the course of our conversation today, I do believe that the Rockets are a improved team. I think this Rockets team has a lot of talent, especially in that starting lineup. So the Kings can't afford to take the Rockets, or anyone for that matter, lightly. This is still the NBA. The Kings' expectation should absolutely be that they get both of these games. But that doesn't mean that they can walk into both of these games and go, this is a piece of cake. We don't need to try that hard, especially with DeAaron Fox still in question. Now, the good news is Fox, with his super healing powers, might be available for the Kings at some point in this 2-game Houston series. So that would be nice to get number 5 back, of course. We don't want him to be rushed back by any means, because this is early in the season, and these are the kind of games that you think that your depth is good enough to carry you through. You took the Golden State Warriors to the very edge on the road without DeAaron Fox. You should be able to beat the Houston Rockets without DeAaron Fox. Would love to see him back if he's fully healthy and cleared to go. Absolutely, DeAaron, get back in here and help the Sacramento Kings win these games. But if there's still a question, I say keep DeAaron out. I believe in this team and their ability to close things out and bounce back from their loss to the Warriors earlier this week. But let's talk about what this Rockets team looks like. What needs to happen for the Kings to be successful and get both of these games? Jackson Gatlin from Locked On Rockets helps me break it down right here on Locked On Kings.
We've got a very special crossover Locked On episode today, as we are here to preview the upcoming doubleheader between the Houston Rockets and Sacramento Kings. We've got Matt George from Locked On Kings. You can follow on Twitter at MattGeorgeSAC. And I am the host of Locked On Rockets, Jackson Gatlin, who you can track down on Twitter at JT Gatlin. And Matt, we are headed for what is going to be, I think, a really fun doubleheader between these two basketball teams, especially when you consider that the engines for these two teams, right? The straw that stirs the drink, if you will, for both these ball clubs, the two big men in the middle, Alperen Sengun, Domantas Sabonis. Watching these two guys go head-to-head, some very similar skill sets across the board for these guys. That matchup is going to be a ton of fun to kind of witness, even though there's some injuries on both sides with certain key players going to be missing one, if not both of these games, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's why the hyper focus might be on that matchup between those two bigs because I mean, at least from the Sacramento Kings side of things, DeAaron Fox is questionable to play in either of these games. It's unfortunate because Houston is Fox's hometown, so Fox always likes to play a little bit more against the Rockets, regardless of the circumstance of where their team is at or where the Kings are at or whatever. But DeAaron also has a tendency to return early from injuries. Like he had a grade 3 ankle sprain which is the worst grade 3 worst ankle sprain like you could possibly have before it becomes like beyond a sprain. And he had that a handful of years ago and then came back from that weeks early. Now he has this ankle sprain that he suffered against the Los Angeles Lakers. And there's already talks like maybe he could go for the Kings tomorrow against the Houston Rockets. So my hope, I would love to see DeAaron Fox play, of course, and DeAaron Fox playing immediately raises the Sacramento Kings expectations to, yeah, they should probably beat the Rockets too. Absolutely, they should beat the Rockets if Fox is playing. But you also want to take care of your star, right? And recognize that the regular season, the beginning of the regular season isn't as important to the Sacramento Kings as maybe it was 2 or 3 seasons ago, right? Like the Kings are thinking long-term, the Kings are thinking playoffs, and they don't want to bang up their star too early and have him re-aggravate or make the injury any worse. So it's up in the air whether or not DeAaron Fox plays tomorrow or even on Monday night's game. Either way, the Sacramento Kings still feel pretty confident in their ability to win without him. They took the Golden State Warriors to the very edge, lost by 1 point on a Klay Thompson buzzer beater on the other night here. So it's the expectations are still high for Sacramento, and a lot of it does have to do, of course, with the presence of Domantas Sabonis.
For sure. And on the Rockets side, I mean, missing out on still no Tari Eason, who may make it back for the second matchup between these two teams. But that's still kind of questionable at this point. He did say in a recent practice scrum that he is very soon, coming back very, very soon. And Rockets fans are incredibly excited to see him back on the court. Hasn't played yet in the regular season. Then unfortunately, Amin Thompson and the Rockets win against the Charlotte Hornets with that grade 2 ankle sprain in the late in the third quarter. So really unfortunate injury for him. He's going to be out for a long time. So some key contributors for the Rockets missing in this game. But Matt, when we look at this kind of matchup, I think of the Kings with no De'Aaron Fox. Sabonis might be the guy that everything's runs through all the actions, all the front court touches, everything, all the DHO sets, everything that Sacramento does that makes them so unique and such a potent offensive team. But De'Aaron's their closer. He's their go-to guy. He's the tip of the spear, Mr. Crunch time in the fourth quarter, all that. How have they looked? Or how does this team change, I guess, without De'Aaron in the lineup? Who do they go to in those moments? Do they rely more on Domas? Do they go to Malik Monk? What happens? How does this team change without De'Aaron in the lineup?
Well, we've had essentially a game and an overtime period of a sample size, at least this season, with De'Aaron Fox out of the lineup. In the overtime win over the Los Angeles Lakers, Malik Monk really stepped up and I believe scored either it was either 11 or 13 points. I can't remember in overtime to help the Sacramento Kings defeat the Los Angeles Lakers. So Malik definitely has, if there's a player on Sacramento's roster whose game is closest to De'Aaron's, it's Malik Monk. That being said, nobody can play De'Aaron's game better than De'Aaron. So it's not like, hey, there's a one-on-one replacement there. Malik played fine. He didn't play great against the Golden State Warriors, but offensively, nobody played great against the Golden State Warriors in a game where Sacramento only scored 101 points when last season they averaged 120. So the scoring, there's still a big question mark there. Now, Domantas Sabonis led the Kings in scoring. I think he had 23 points. He hit a bank shot that put the Kings up by 1. I don't know if he called glass or not, but it doesn't matter. It still counts as 2. He hit a straightaway bank shot to put the Kings up by 1 that could have been the game winner had Klay Thompson not decided to rip the hearts out of the Sacramento Kings fan base again. So, ultimately, that question is still up in the air. Now, to me, Jackson, one of the things that the Golden State Warriors did really, really well and recognized, and I think Houston probably will recognize this too, that if there is a star player or a next man up guy to take a brunt of the scoring role with De'Aaron Fox being out, it's not Domantas Sabonis. It's Keegan Murray. And the Warriors did a really good job making Keegan as uncomfortable as possible. He went 0 of 7 from three-point range, ultimately just scored 10 points. The fact that the Kings still had a chance to win is pretty incredible. I'll give that credit to their defense in that sense. But Keegan Murray is going to be that guy that I think most people look at to. Maybe Sabonis leads the Kings in scoring again, but if there's going to be big shots or a big stretch or someone to catch fire, Keegan's probably towards the top of that list.
I'm so curious because you bring up Keegan and you know, we're going into year 2 for him, you know, same draft class coming out, you know, with Jabari Smith Jr. So there's always a little bit of a chip on their shoulder playing against, you know, guys playing against each other like that. What are the expectations for him, you know, this season? Because he was kind of one of those guys that came in as, hey, he's plug and play. He's NBA ready right now. He's going to be able to hit shots, defend, you know, some of the basic things you want him to be able to do. Is there an expectation for Keegan to take kind of like a massive leap forward, or how has his role kind of changed, or the expectations changed for him coming into this year?
There absolutely is the expectation of a leap. The expectation is that Keegan Murray right away is the third scorer go-to option on this Kings team, and at times can step up in that second spot if needed in a case like DeAaron Fox being injured, Domantas Sabonis being injured, or even Fox is playing and having a really good game, and Sabonis is focusing kind of on distributing and running the offense in the way that he does. So, hey, Keegan, this is for you to step up and be that other 20-point scorer to help the Sacramento Kings win. Like that's what the Kings are looking for. They're looking for leaps from guys across the board, especially defensively. But Keegan's like, this is a big 3 league, right? Like a lot of teams, you have to have like an established core 3 plus a great supporting cast, but an established core 3 to really kind of get you to that championship conversation. Keegan is the third piece of that. And they believe as early as this season, his sophomore season in the NBA, if you will, that he is capable of stepping up and doing that as not just a 3-point shooter, which he established himself as last year, but a 3-level scorer. And he's shown an ability to do that. The Warriors game was the first game so far that he hasn't looked good offensively. And that's because the Warriors treated him like the number 1 offensive option and guarded him as such, which is something that I think he needed to face. So expectations are high on the shoulders of Keegan Murray. He is expected to be an offensive leader of this Kings team. And especially with DeAaron Fox out, Sacramento is going to be looking to him for big shots.
I know it's so early, Matt. So it's like, you know, whenever you talk about like the sample sizes from like 3 games, 5 games, you're like, take it with a massive grain of salt. But, you know, Kings are clocking in 8th best offense in the NBA right now, 8th in offensive rating. They were number 1, you know, in the NBA by what you would consider a pretty steady, pretty wide margin, I guess. Is there some offensive drop off this season, or is it just too early to tell where they're going to be at offensively?
I think it's too early to tell from the standpoint of 2 of the 4 games that the Kings have played have been against the Golden State Warriors. And if you look back to the Kings and Warriors playoff series, Kings were number 1 offense, Warriors were number 2 offense, and neither looked like it at any point over the course of that series. Like both, that is such a weird matchup for each other. Like I'm sick and tired of seeing it, truth be told, because one, we've seen it a million times.
Hey man, if anybody understands being sick and tired of the Warriors, I'm your guy, okay?
Right, for sure. But like we've seen it so many times, and both those teams, for having such high offensive strengths, they do such a good job negating each other's strength. So I think those numbers are kind of marred a little bit by the fact that the Kings and the Warriors have played literally half of the games that they've played so far. And that's just a little obscure because they played the Utah Jazz to open up the season. They score 130 points. They look completely like themselves. They play the Los Angeles Lakers, even with Domantas Sabonis fouling out and De'Aaron Fox barely playing in overtime. They managed to defeat LeBron James, Anthony Davis, and the Los Angeles Lakers and score, I think, 132 points in that game if you count the overtime period. So like it's outside of the Warriors, I think the Kings are their normal, really, really dynamic, good offensive selves. And I think that's the expectation for these 2 games against the Rockets is, okay, Kings are going to get back to their scoring ways a little bit. But against the Warriors and maybe some of the top, we have to see against like teams like Denver, maybe if you go to the East against a Boston or Milwaukee, I have no idea. But like 2 of the 4 games being against Golden State has certainly had an effect on those offensive and defensive numbers, to be honest with you, Jackson, because the Kings played good defense against the Warriors in the playoffs. And as of right now, I think they're 17th in defensive rating, which is a big upgrade from the 24, 25, 26 that they were at last season. So those numbers are definitely early season numbers. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, and I think it's going to be one of the reasons I think this matchup is going to be so interesting is the Rockets have completely changed like style is. Well, first off, they're not a dumpster fire, so there's that. But like they've adopted, right, the Ime Udoka, you know, defense first mentality, and guys are buying into it, right? The young guys have bought into it. They brought in the veterans and Fred VanVleet, Dylan Brooks, who are really trying to hammer home the lessons that he's teaching. And first off, again, early sample size, but Rockets are a top 5 defense when it comes to fast break transition points, right? And that's an area where they were dead last in the NBA last season. They've shown pretty much what I want to call monumental improvement game to game. They come out in the season opener, they got slapped by the Orlando Magic, they got punched in the jaw. They really just weren't ready in that game. You come back, you have a much better response against the San Antonio Spurs, and you maybe even think, oh, well, the Rockets should have won that game. The Spurs are, going to be another lottery team this year. I don't know about it based on how good Wemby has looked and the fact that the Rockets lost to the Spurs and now the Spurs have beaten the Suns twice. I feel a little bit better about that loss, seeing what Wemby is doing, terrorizing other NBA teams as well. And then they go toe-to-toe with the Warriors, and they were right there with the Warriors up until about 4 or 5 minutes left in the game until, as you know all too well, Steph Curry just did Steph Curry things. When he decided he wanted to take over, he hit the first three, and then the avalanche just came right afterwards. But this team has improved so drastically in what feels like the span of like a very, very short amount of time defensively, to where they have this new defensive identity. And it's going to be really interesting watching them go up against this high octane Kings offense.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued by this Rockets team, and I definitely have some questions about them, especially with the starting lineup, because this is the one thing that, like, it's separating expectations from cockiness, right? And we'll get into this probably a little bit in the next segment, Jackson, but it's the expectation for Sacramento is at bare minimum they split these two games on the road, bare minimum. But I think most people, including everybody in the Sacramento Kings locker room, their coaching staff, without taking the Rockets lightly, the expectation is that the Kings will win both of these games just based off of where these teams are at. But you can't take a roster that the Rockets have put together lightly. So I'm excited to kind of dive into that a little bit more. Today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is brought to you by PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy sports made easy. It's the largest DFS platform in North America, and it has the most exciting ways to play daily. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including the Sharks out there and the pros, it's just you versus the PrizePicks projections. The way it works, you pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections. If you get them right, you can win up to 25 times your money. If you were with basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball. That's especially great for this weekend with either college football and the Sacramento Kings playing on Saturday, or even the Sacramento Kings on Saturday and NBA or NFL football on Sunday. They have these specials league, a league created specifically for combo projections that includes 2 or more players from different sports or leagues. For example, you could take LeBron James plus Travis Kelce at 10.5 combo of 3-pointers made plus receptions. Those are just an example of the kind of things that you can play at PrizePicks. PrizePicks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in place even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return to the second, that player is rebooted, meaning PrizePicks is not going to punish you because they got hurt halfway through the game. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports program with an injury insurance policy. Go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNBA and use code LockedOnNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. PrizePicks, daily fantasy sports made easy. One of the things I'm curious about, Jackson, is this is the second year in a row that the Kings and Rockets have played back-to-back games against each other. Last year, it was in Sacramento, and if I remember correctly, things got a little chippy in that second game. So it's like a small simulated playoff series, I guess. But what is your opinion of these 2 games against the same team? Because until the playoffs, I didn't really like it. Now with the playoffs, I kind of understand it a little bit more. I know teams love it. Broadcasters love it because they can just stay in one place for a given period of time. So the Kings are certainly happy about not having to jump right back on a plane after the first game tomorrow. But how do you feel about these 2 games against the same team?
I mean, having spoken to, a number of coaches and players about these little like mini series, if you will, within the regular season, I think it's a great learning tool. And it's a great learning tool for both veteran teams and for younger teams, right? You kind of had this barometer for, the adjustments on a game to game basis where you play the exact same opponent. Now there might be some variables here. Obviously, maybe DeAaron makes it back for the second game, or maybe Tari Eason's there for the second game. So it's not quite the exact same 1-for-1 matchup, but it's a nice, I think, little test for the coaches to see how do you adjust game to game. Do you get blown out in the first game and then you come back and you make those adjustments and you take a win the second game, vice versa? Are you just dominant in both of these games? I love them as just a kind of a test to gauge where your team is at in relation to another team, and especially with a matchup like this one between the Rockets and Kings, where, again, Kings have this incredibly high-octane offense. Rockets have kind of tried to adopt this defense first identity. And this is going to be a really big test for them to say, hey, can we actually stay true to some of these defensive fundamentals and principles that Ime is trying to establish with these guys? We're still seeing, at times these mental lapses from guys like Jaylen and Jabari, where they're just not locked in. Things like missing, an assignment on like a free throw line box out, very simple things that you absolutely cannot do if you want to be a good team in the NBA, or failing last game to pick up LaMelo Ball after a made bucket. He just walked into a wide open 3-pointer because of some miscommunication between Jaylen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. And you've got now guys like Fred VanVleet and Dillon Brooks, who are bringing the accountability to the table. Dillon Brooks called them out post-game when I asked him what happened on that play. He goes, well, I kind of feel like it's the same guys that keep making those mistakes. And sooner or later, they'll learn that you can't make those mistakes against good teams because they will make you pay for it.
And that's a really key point right there. And that's where I think the focus of the Sacramento Kings and their approach to this game has changed from years past. Because normally the Kings are in the position of what you just said, right? They're the ones making the mistakes that good teams are coming in and exploiting. Now the Kings have to be the team to exploit those Rockets mistakes a little bit, those Rockets miscues. And it's only natural for them to happen. And look, the Kings are going to have miscues too, especially if DeAaron Fox isn't playing. So I'm not saying Sacramento's perfect and the Rockets are not. But like, tell me if this is a fair or unfair approach, Jackson, from your Rockets perspective on how the Sacramento Kings are approaching this game. I said in the last segment, like, the belief is the Kings should come out of this 2-game mini series 2-0. Like that's their expectation. 1-1 is a bare minimum. But Sacramento, I believe, is approaching this game like the Rockets. They have a good roster. They have talent. So we can't just walk in here and just expect to win it and take them lightly, or we could get punched in the mouth, regardless of if DeAaron Fox is playing or not. But this team is not on our level. We're an established playoff team, or at least we believe we are what we were last season, which is a top 3 seed in the Western Conference. Sure, the Rockets might be better, as the entire Western Conference seems to be better, but this should be our weekend. Like, fair or unfair approach for Sacramento to have?
I think that's exactly the approach Sacramento should have going into these 2 games, right? And then I think when you kind of take the counter approach, you have to look at this from Sacramento's viewpoint, right? The Rockets are a better team, and they're not the walk in the park that they were last season, right? You look at the additions of the veterans, and you also look at the numbers that support it. Their starting lineup, Matt, has actually been phenomenal. I mean, it's on par with some of the best starting lineups in the NBA. I believe last I checked, they were the 8th best starting lineup as far as net rating goes amongst NBA starters. The issue is their bench has just been so catastrophic. So in 72 minutes of runtime, the Rocket starters have a 12.4 net rating. That's absurd. And you've seen Ime make these adjustments where he has to lean very heavily on his starters because the bench has just been so abysmal. And now you take another shot to the bench. So no Tari Eason, at least for this first game. Maybe he's back for the second one. Now there's no Amin Thompson. Coming into the season, they had Kevin Porter Jr. in their plans. Then you had the allegations come up, that whole messy situation that we're not going to unpack here on this show. But right, he was in their plans because he was going to be kind of that dynamic scoring punch off the bench. So you're missing essentially what were supposed to be 3 key contributors to your bench unit in the early going of this season. So bitten by the injury bug very early on. How do they overcome that? And Ime's been trying to kind of stagger lineups and get really creative with how he approaches these things. But I think from the Rockets' perspective, they're coming into this with the utmost belief that they can win both of these games as well. And I don't think that the belief is even displaced. They were sloppy game 1 against the Magic, but they've gotten so much better each game that I actually feel like they're going to take that win against the Hornets and kind of snowball it into potentially a pair of wins here against the Kings, especially if De'Aaron Fox isn't playing. Now, if Fox comes back for one of these games, then I think we're going to have a different story here because he just elevates the Kings to another level. He elevates them to that top 3 seed in the West level that they were at last year. But without De'Aaron and with this Rockets team and the way that their starters are playing, at least, I think, either team here could walk away with 2 wins if a couple 50-50 balls break the right way, that kind of thing. I don't think it's an easy 2-0 for the Kings, and I also don't think it's just a guaranteed 1-1.
I will say this. If the Sacramento Kings walk out of Houston without a win in these 2 games, there are going to be some concerning alarms going off in Sacramento. I'll say that. Not that it's not possible, but especially with after the Warriors game and how that went, the Kings are looking to bounce back here. But I put myself in the mindset of, if I were to ask myself the same question I just asked you 2 or 3 years ago, I would kind of answer it the same way, like, yeah, that's a fair expectation, but here's my ace up my sleeve, right? But DeAaron Fox isn't going to allow that. Or, but hey, this is different this year. What is the but there? You said there's a realistic scenario where the Rockets could go 2-0. I don't necessarily see it, but the Rockets certainly better than I do. What is that ace up the sleeve of? You mentioned the starting lineup, so maybe that's it. But okay, if the Kings think they're just going to come in here and win both of these games, here's my counter to that Sacramento might not be prepared for.
I think it's less so about maybe what the Kings are not going to be prepared for, and more that the Rockets are starting to are leaning into and identifying what they're really good at. And post game after the Hornets game, Fred VanVleet identified that Alperen Sengun is their go-to bucket. He specifically called him that. He said that both he, Fred, and Ime have identified that that is the guy that they can go to down the stretch of a game when they need a bucket, when the going gets tough. And the Rockets really haven't had a de facto go-to guy in a long time. A lot of people kind of think, oh, well, maybe it's just Jaylen Green because he's, the dynamic two guard. But Alp is their best shot at getting a bucket when it's crunch time, when you need something late. He's the one guy on the team that commands a double team routinely. If you don't send a double, he's either going to draw a foul or he's going to work somebody down low and get a high quality shot in and around the rim. And so I think that the Rockets have been able to take strides enough defensively that they're going to be able to mitigate some of what Sacramento wants to do, at least in the transition for sure. They're a much better transition defense team, so they're not going to give up the easy points there. They'll still make their mistakes. They've had turned the ball over a little bit too much. They've also struggled closing out good defensive possessions. Sabonis might have a field day on the offensive glass potentially in these couple games. But if the Rockets can keep this thing close and at least be, kind of hang around as they get to crunch time, I like their chances because they're identifying, hey, we're going to run through LP down low and we're going to get high quality looks. Now, unfortunately, this team's Achilles heel is the fact that they cannot shoot worth a lick. They are a terrible shooting team. So that's kind of the inverse here, where the Kings have this incredibly high octane offense with all this shooting surrounding DeAaron Fox and Domantas Sabonis. And the Rockets have a similar player in Alperen Sengun who can do some of the things that Sabonis can do. And they run a lot of dribble handoff sets and he gets a lot of front court touches, but they have like zero shooting around him. So he creates these phenomenal looks for his teammates. And then it's just wide open three, clank, wide open three, clank. So if there's an Achilles heel for the Rockets in either of these two games, it's going to be if their shooting doesn't show up. It showed up in a really big way against the Hornets. Maybe that's a sign of things to come. Maybe the shot starts to settle in for Jaylen Green and Jabari Smith Jr. Dylan Brooks has been shooting the lights out of the ball. Fred VanVleet has been fantastic so far, but it's been really up and down outside of Fred and Dylan, unfortunately, as far as the outside shooting for Houston.
Like I said at the top of the show, today's episode of the Locked On Kings podcast is also brought to you by FanDuel. You can score early this NFL season with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 moneyline bet. So pick a game, right? And pick a game where there's a heavy favorite. Find that game. Put $5 down on the team that you expect to win. Even if the payout from that is not very big, it wouldn't be considered necessarily a good bet for your money, right? It doesn't matter because once that team wins and once you win that money line bet, here's $150 in bonus bets right there for you to keep playing, have fun, and making money over the course of your FanDuel career. And you can bet on so many things from spreads to player props, over-unders, and more. You can either go with the NBA in-season tournament about to get going. You can even bet on the in-season tournament. The Sacramento Kings have the 15th best odds, so they're right in the middle of the pack to win the in-season tournament. But here's the thing, out of their West Group C, they have the second worst odds to win the group. Of course, the Golden State Warriors are favored. The Minnesota Timberwolves and Oklahoma City Thunder both have better odds than the Sacramento Kings to win the group. So you can make some good money off of that as well if you're feeling confident about the Kings' chances in the NBA in-season tournament. If you've been thinking about joining FanDuel, there's no better time to get in on the action. Visit FanDuel.com/locked on and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL.
And rolling into our final segment here for our special Locked On crossover edition, going into this Rockets-Kings matchup, the first of two matchups. And Honestly, Matt, first off, I do want to say here for all the Kings fans listening to this, the Kings were such a fun team to watch last year. They're such a fun team to watch in general. I just love all the little, like the pistol action that they run through Sabonis, all the little movements and everything. I was talking with some of the Rockets media members at practice as we're recording this today on Friday. They're such a hard team to defend. And I do think this is going to be a great kind of little barometer for where the Rockets are at, trying to figure out, okay, are we actually a good defensive team, right? Can we actually negate some of what the Kings want to do? It's one thing to just, not attack the offensive glass, draw everybody back and just say, hey, we're not giving up any transition points. We're going to be a very conservative team in that regard. It's another thing to actually find ways to shut down a team like the Kings in the half court. So I think this is a big moment for this Rockets team to kind of figure out, okay, are we actually serious this year? And, I think the best, I don't want to say best case outcome is going 2-0 if you're the Houston Rockets, and that's a horrendous outcome if you're the Kings. But I think for them, they would at least want to split this series, right? I think for the Rockets, if they split the series, I think it validates some of what they're doing, and it could be either way, right? They take the first game, then it's all right, cool, and then maybe Kings come back, take the second one. It's like, all right, Kings got the better of us. Maybe we got the upper hand on them in the first game. They weren't as prepared or didn't take them as seriously in the first game, or the vice versa, where maybe the Kings take the first game and you come back, Ime makes adjustments, and they say, hey, okay, we lost the first one, but we figured out exactly what went wrong. We went into the second game and we cleaned up those mistakes and we took a win. And I think there's positives from either dynamic there as far as a 1-1 split is concerned.
I do think Sacramento is looking to reestablish kind of their offense. And one thing that the Kings have done really, really well so far this season, in the one game that they had it, and all last season, is they do a really good job following up tough losses with good performances. They have made kind of an identity of that out of this new group and like the Mike Brown era here in Sacramento. They avoided long losing streaks, the tough loss at the hands of Klay Thompson and the Golden State Warriors. So I fully expect Sacramento to bounce back in that sense. Now, granted, how much can your offense bounce back when you're missing a 31 point per game score? So again, with the question mark of DeAaron Fox up there, like this is a team that depth wise, you can never replace someone like DeAaron fully, but depth-wise, you should be able to maintain. And maintaining, in this sense, is winning minimum one, but potentially both of these games against the Houston Rockets. Like these are games that theoretically your roster is deep enough that you can manage without Fox in definitely at least one of these games, but maybe both, depending upon how cautious Sacramento wants to be with Fox. And I mean, you mentioned earlier, like the concern with the bench of the Rockets. That's where I think maybe Sacramento is really going to try to exploit things, because Mike always staggers his lineups. So there's typically 1 to 2 starters on the floor at all times. And Mike always likes to have one of Fox or Sabonis on the floor at all times. Of course, with Fox out, those minutes where neither are on the floor, maybe are where Houston's going to look to make their push. But the depth that the Sacramento Kings have added, Malik Monk can kill you at any given time. Davion Mitchell is stepping into the starter role with Fox hurt, but kind of still staggered as that bench defender who can also do a little bit better job than in the past spacing the floor. Sasha Vezenkov has come in as a light-up three-point shooter, plus other pieces, Chris Duarte if you want. Trey Lyles is still coming back from injury. That's a big deal. JaVale McGee has established a really good pick-and-roll game with Malik. So there are pieces on this Sacramento roster that make Fox's absence a little more bearable, especially against a team like the Rockets, who, not disrespecting them as the laughingstock that they were last year, but still expecting them to not be on the level that Sacramento expects to get to. And we're all talking expectations here. Reality might be different than expectations. Reality might be that the Kings aren't as above Houston as they think they are, or the standings last season suggested they are, but they're operating as if that is the case. So until they show us otherwise, that's kind of the expectation that we have here for them in Sacramento.
One of the other key matchups I'm so excited to see in this game, Matt, is Davion Mitchell against Jaylen Green, because Jaylen is now, I mean, and kind of he took on this mantle last year kind of already, but even more so this year, where, every night he gets, the opposing team's defensive ace. And it's really, he struggled. He flat out struggled. Awful game against the Orlando Magic. And then, he picked it up a little bit against the Spurs. Warriors was kind of a quieter game because Şengün and Fred VanVleet were having such strong nights. He kind of, I don't want to say he faded, but he just kind of let the team go with what was working. And then against the Charlotte Hornets, he was incredibly hot in the first quarter, just disappeared in the middle part of the game, and then showed up at the end of the game when it mattered most, dropped in 9 points in a very short span into the fourth quarter, including an impressive assist to Alperen Sengun for a monster, thunderous slam, kind of the exclamation point on that win for the Rockets. And Jaylen's whole issue is he's just so inconsistent. He'll have quarters where he looks like he's unguardable, and then he'll have quarters where you forget that he's even on the basketball floor. And going up against an elite defender like Davion Mitchell, I'm worried that this game might be one of those games where like he sometimes shies away the moment like the going gets tough a little bit, where, and we saw this a lot happen last season, where he'll try to, dice up a defender, get to his, inside out dribble, boom, boom, start making a move. And then if he gets shut down, then he's just like, all right, I'm going to pitch it back to whoever and let somebody else try. I need to see an aggressive version of Jaylen where even when the shot's not falling, when he basically, right, superstars, the players that become superstars learn how to manufacture offense, right? They find ways to get themselves going, whether it's just putting their head down and getting to the free throw line, drawing fouls, collapsing the defense and creating for others. I need to see that step from Jaylen Green, and having to deal with Davion Mitchell in back-to-back games is going to be a pretty big test for him to say, hey, how do you respond to being checked by an elite perimeter defender? And can you at times put this Rockets team on your shoulders and carry them offensively? Because right now, Ime has been leaning on Jaylen as kind of that second unit, or the guy to buoy the second unit, essentially. He comes out of the game early, and then he subs back in late in the first quarter, and he's kind of the scoring punch for that second unit that really doesn't have a scoring punch. Now, that might change as far as the rotation patterns now that Amin Thompson is out. I don't think it necessarily will. Aaron Holiday is probably going to be the guy that absorbs most, if not all, of those Amin Thompson minutes. And Ime has said that he's not afraid of playing the 2 6-foot guards together in Fred VanVleet and Aaron Holiday, because much like his brother Drew Holiday, Aaron plays a lot bigger than he actually is. So that's one of the key matchups here that I'm really looking forward to seeing how Jaylen responds to Davion Mitchell across these two games.
And Jaylen's play might feed into this final question that I wanted to ask you, Jackson, which is how well, in a 4-game sample size, how well the Rockets have handled and do handle adversity. Because what the Kings have been consistent with over these 4 games is in all 4 games, they have built double-digit leads. Unfortunately, in 3 out of the 4 games, those double-digit leads have been erased to 0 or even in the negative, right? The 2 games against the Warriors, Kings had a double-digit lead. They lost both those games. Game against the Lakers, they built, I think, a 15-point lead at one point. That game ended up going to overtime, and the Kings nearly lost it in regulation. So a concern of Sacramento's, or at least a concern of mine so far, and an area that this Kings team still needs to grow, is when you have control of a game, keeping your foot on the gas pedal and not allowing teams back in. Basketball is a game of runs, so it's more common now than it has been in the past to erase a 15-point lead, but it shouldn't happen every single time you have one. So expecting the trend to continue, the Kings build a double-digit lead in the second or third quarter against the Houston Rockets. How well do you expect them to respond to that? Because there's a very good chance that might happen.
I think they've actually been pretty resilient, honestly. They, the Orlando Magic built up a massive lead against the Rockets, and they responded really well. They made some halftime adjustments defensively, came out with the right energy, and they looked actually really good. They got back into the game in Orlando after trailing by double digits early in that game. Again, Orlando with some very hot shooting early on. Franz Wagner got going early in that one. They came out of halftime. They cut the game down to, I think, a 1-possession game before Orlando opened that thing back up. San Antonio, same kind of thing. I mean, that was more of a back and forth game across the board. Then they push it to overtime. San Antonio actually kind of got themselves back into that game. So it's similar to what you were saying, where you build up that, maybe not a double-digit lead, but you build up, maintain a lead, and then they kind of let go of the rope there a little bit against the Spurs, let them back in, gets to overtime, and then the Spurs were just dominant in overtime. The Rockets were gassed. Alperen Sengun had a bunch of turnovers. Looked like he was kind of waning from the usage late in that game because they were riding him so hard in that one. Pause. But I do think, and even against the Warriors, they had some, stretches where the Warriors jumped out ahead and they responded well. So I do think that this team last year, they would wilt at any sign of adversity. They would wilt immediately, heads hanging low, not trying anymore, not doing the little things, no more hustle, settling offensively, all of it, right? All the bad stuff that comes with when, you face a little bit of adversity, as one does when you're a tanking team and you have no expectations, no hope, no desire to, make the playoffs, or no expectations of what you're supposed to be doing in a given season. This team is not that. This team, despite whether they go down 10, 15, 20, The veterans, Fred, Dylan, they're not going to allow it. Ime won't allow it. And he'll pull guys for not giving proper effort. He's done it already. He'll do situational substitutions where if he sees a guy half-assing it on the court, he'll sub him out really quick, yell at him, and throw him back in the game. He does not stand for lack of effort. And one thing that has been consistent for this team through these first 4 games is that they have not lacked for effort whatsoever, which was oftentimes very much in question with last year's Houston Rockets.
Well, I'll say one thing that does that I am taking away, the main thing that I am taking away from this conversation, I think Kings fans should as well. Expectations should be high for Sacramento. Expectations should be that they're coming home with a pair of wins, but the Kings cannot afford to take anyone, but especially this Houston Rockets team lightly, whether or not DeAaron Fox is available, because this seems like a sneaky Rockets team that can jump on you if you ever take your foot off the gas. And like I said, we've seen the Kings take their foot off the gas a little bit too many times over the course of this season so far. So hopefully they've learned their lesson a little bit and they can truly establish themselves as that better Western Conference team that they believe them to be. But it sounds like the Rockets are going to put that to the test.
It should be a lot of fun, honestly, across these 2 games. And we appreciate you guys for tuning in for this special Locked On crossover edition. Do us all a favor. Go follow Matt on Twitter at MattGeorgeSAC, and be sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast and on YouTube. Just search Locked On Kings. If you're interested on the Rockets angle, the reaction to this game, good or bad, in the aftermath of these upcoming 2 games, come check me out on Twitter at JT Gatlin. I'll be boots on the ground here in Houston covering the game. And you can also follow and subscribe Locked On Rockets wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube.